Welcome, listener, in the shadows. We bring stories into the light. Join me as we explore the encounters no one speaks of and the things that watch from the dark. Before we dive into tonight's terrifying tale, a quick question. Do you dare wear the fear? Our exclusive Shadows merch is here. Hoodies, tees, and more, designed for those who embrace the darkness. Get yours before they vanish forever. Link below. The Last Hunt, Part 1. Echoes of the Forgotten. I've always been the one in the group who believed. I wasn't one of those who brushed off the paranormal as nonsense. No, I welcomed it, always searching for answers in the eerie and unknown. My uncle, an eccentric man with an unsettling obsession with the dark and unexplained, had shaped my curiosity. He taught me that some things in the world weren't meant to be understood, and more importantly, they weren't meant to be disturbed. But I didn't listen to him, not that night. It was late January 2018. A thick snowstorm had turned the world outside into a cold, desolate wilderness, the wind howling through the trees like the cries of forgotten souls. My friends and I had decided to visit Ravenwood Sanitarium, a place that had been abandoned for decades, shrouded in rumors of strange deaths and ghostly whispers. A blizzard raged around us as we drove, the car headlights cutting through the thick, oppressive snow, illuminating nothing but the barren, endless white wilderness. The hospital had been closed down in the late 70s after a series of mysterious, unexplained deaths, and the locals spoke of it like a curse, something that should be left alone. But curiosity, that nagging, insidious itch, had led us here. The moment we arrived at the sanitarium, something heavy settled over me. The gates were rusted and chained shut, overrun with thick ivy, the air around them thick with an unnatural stillness. The wind seemed to have died down, but there was an unsettling quiet that hung in the air, thick and suffocating. It felt like the whole place was holding its breath, waiting. "Well, that's a bad sign," Chris muttered, his breath visible in the cold air, his voice barely audible over the deafening silence. What kind of place has this kind of energy? I didn't answer him. I just couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, waiting for us to step inside. We clambered over the rusted gates, the snow crunching beneath our feet like brittle bones. The parking lot in front of the building was empty, save for the scattered remnants of old cars and overgrown weeds creeping through the cracks in the pavement. Everything around us was so still, so unnaturally still. I could feel the weight of it pressing against my chest, tightening my lungs. We made our way toward the building, the walls looming over us like an ancient predator. The air inside the building was cold, colder than the outside air, a deep, unsettling chill that sunk into your bones. As I passed through the broken front doors, the smell hit me. It wasn't the usual staleness of an abandoned building. No, this was something worse. It smelled like decay, but not just the decay of wood and metal. It was a deeper rot, something ancient and foul, like something that had been dead far longer than the sanitarium itself. I shivered involuntarily. "Let's split up," I suggested, my voice shaky despite my attempts to keep it steady. "We'll cover more ground that way." Chris nodded, but there was a hesitance in his eyes. We made our way down the hallway to the left, the soft, distant creak of the building settling making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The silence was maddening, every footstep amplified in the dead air, echoing off the walls in a way that felt wrong, almost like the building was listening to us, watching us. We reached the cafeteria, a large room with long tables overturned and chairs scattered about. The walls were peeling, the ceiling buckling under the weight of neglect. I could feel something off about the room. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, curling around the corners of the walls as if they were alive, moving with a mind of their own. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the thought. I wasn't here for ghost stories, I was here for answers. But then something happened. I froze, a chill crawling up my spine, making the hairs on my arms stand up. A sound, distant at first, but growing louder. A faint, low, scraping noise. It was coming from the hallway we had just passed. It was subtle at first, like something dragging across the floor, but it was getting closer. My breath caught in my throat. "Chris," I started, my voice barely a whisper, but Chris wasn't listening. He was too focused on the far side of the room, eyes darting to the window as if drawn to something outside. I followed his gaze. There in the distance, through the cracked, dirty window, I saw a figure. A tall, thin silhouette, standing just beyond the threshold of the building, its form half hidden in the shadows. Its eyes, black, empty voids, stared back at me. My heart began to pound in my chest. I tried to move, but my body was frozen, my legs refusing to obey. The figure didn't move, didn't blink. It just stood there, waiting. And then the air grew colder. "Chris," I breathed, my voice trembling now. "We need to go. Now." But as I reached for him, the scraping noise grew louder, closer, like something was crawling toward us. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the dark, oppressive hallway stretching before us. The scraping stopped abruptly. The silence returned, but it was thicker now, suffocating. We made our way back toward the hallway, but as we turned the corner, something brushed against my arm. My skin burned where it touched, like a cold, clammy hand grazing my flesh. I whipped around, but there was nothing there. Just the dark, oppressive hallway stretching before us. "Did you?" I began, but Chris was already ahead of me, moving faster now, his pace quickening with every step. The further we ventured into the building, the more disorienting it became. The walls seemed to close in on us. The faint sound of whispers lingered in the air, too low to understand, but unmistakable. It was as if the building itself was alive, breathing around us, feeding off our fear. Then there was another noise, louder this time. A low, guttural growl that rumbled from deep within the walls. It shook the floor beneath our feet, vibrating through my bones. I turned to Chris, my mouth dry, my heart hammering in my chest. "Do you hear that?" I asked, but his wide eyes told me all I needed to know. We weren't alone. A door at the end of the hallway creaked open slowly, as though being pushed by invisible hands. The air grew cold again, too cold, and the whispering grew louder, more frantic. We backed up, but the hallway seemed to stretch before us, endlessly long. There was no way out. And then it appeared. The thing. It wasn't human. It was a grotesque mockery of something once alive, its body thin and elongated, its limbs twisted at unnatural angles, its eyes, dark pits, fixed on us, unblinking. Its mouth opened in a silent scream, but no sound came out. Just the oppressive weight of its presence, the suffocating chill of its proximity, the unmistakable stench of rot. It moved toward us, its limbs contorting with sickening speed. We didn't wait for it to get any closer. I grabbed Chris's arm and ran, the sound of its claws scraping against the floor echoing behind us. But no matter how fast we ran, no matter how desperately we tried to escape, the creature was always there, lurking just beyond the edge of our vision, waiting. We didn't look back as we finally reached the front door, throwing it open and running out into the snowstorm, the blizzard swallowing us whole. But even as we ran, even as the howling wind whipped through our clothes, I could feel its eyes on me, following me, waiting for the next time I would come back. With that in mind, Chris and I made our way up to the 3rd floor to check out the cafeteria and kitchen area. This was where the 7th and 8th grade classrooms had been. We'd been hearing strange noises, unexplained thuds and clattering, and our unease grew with every step. We hadn't even reached the 3rd floor when the first horrifying noise echoed from below us, from the kindergarten area on the ground floor. It sounded like something heavy had been dropped, or worse, thrown. "What the hell was that?" Chris muttered, his voice barely a whisper. His tone was tight with fear. "I have no clue," I shot back, my voice shaking. I couldn't hide it. My heart was hammering in my chest. Maybe a crate or something fell. It's probably just some kind of old debris, but even as I said the words, I didn't believe them. Chris wasn't convinced. He was already pacing back and forth, muttering under his breath. "I told you this place wasn't right. This was a terrible idea. Whatever's down there, it's still here." His words felt like a cold hand gripping my spine. I looked back at him, trying to focus. "We're here to explore, man. We came for this. We're just seeing things, all right? Let's finish the check and get out of here. No point in overthinking it." But as I said it, I felt the words falling flat. Why were we here? What made this place stand out among all the other abandoned buildings we could have visited? Chris stared at me, his eyes wide with concern. "You all right, man? Why do you look like you just saw a ghost?" I didn't answer him right away. My stomach churned, and the weight of the question hung in the air like a suffocating fog. Why had we come? Andrew hadn't even been here before. Why this place, of all places? Trying to brush off the unease, I focused on the task at hand. We moved up the stairs to the 3rd floor, each creaking step echoing like a drumbeat in the stillness. When we reached the top, Chris pulled out his flashlight, his hands trembling. But when he clicked it on, nothing happened. He tried again, frustration building in his voice. God damn it, not now. He cursed, slamming the flashlight against his palm. It's fucking dead. I dug around in my bag, praying my own flashlight would work. When I flicked mine on, it sputtered weakly at first, but then the beam steadied. Barely. Thank God, I muttered under my breath. But as I looked at Chris, I noticed something was off. My phone was dead. I had charged it completely before leaving, but now the screen was black, unresponsive. I checked the battery, 0%. I could have sworn I had charged it to 100%. My stomach twisted again. What the hell is going on here? Chris asked, watching me wide-eyed. You think it's some ghost shit, like it's messing with our phones? I didn't know what to say. Probably just a glitch or something. But still, it's weird. I'll try restarting it. After a few attempts, the phone came back on with the familiar Apple logo, but the sense of dread continued to grow like a tangible weight pressing on my chest. We entered the cafeteria. The size of it was unnerving, so vast and empty, the long rows of tables and chairs giving it a cold, hollow presence. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath. We stepped cautiously inside, but nothing seemed out of place. That is, until we heard it. A loud bang, like metal hitting concrete, came from the kitchen area, and I froze in place. The sound rang through the hollow space like a gunshot. It felt like it came from inside my skull. Jesus! Chris yelled, already bolting toward the door. I couldn't move. My body was paralyzed by the shock of it. It was too much, too sudden. When I finally forced myself to look, I caught a glimpse of something behind the counter in the kitchen. It was human, sort of. Its skin was an unnatural shade of gray, blotched with dark patches, its body twisted in odd angles. But it was its eyes that horrified me most. Hollow and black, they seemed to stare right through me. Then it was gone. I ran, adrenaline flooding my system, until I found Chris again, already sprinting toward the classrooms on the 7th and 8th grade floor. We need to get the hell out of here now, he shouted, his voice shaking. I followed him, dread mounting with every step. As we turned a corner near the classrooms, I saw something that made my blood run cold. 3 more figures, hunched and grotesque, were standing in the cafeteria doorway, their movements jerky, unnatural. They weren't alone. Holy shit, I whispered to myself. We reached the 7th grade classrooms and I stopped dead in my tracks. The room was in disarray, furniture overturned, papers scattered, but there was something else. The overwhelming silence felt like it was pressing in on us. I stepped out, looking for Will and Andrew. I saw them standing in the bathroom, their eyes wide with fear. They waved me over, their faces pale. You won't believe what we saw, I started to say, but Will interrupted me. We saw it too. There's some kind of creature roaming around, he whispered, his voice trembling. I looked around in a panic. Wait, where's Andrew? The realization hit me hard. Andrew was gone. Will's face contorted in confusion and fear. He disappeared. We don't know where he went. Before I could respond, I heard a soft shuffle, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the hallway. Will's hand clamped over my mouth, silencing me. We could see them, 2 of those things, moving down the hallway, heading straight for the classroom. Chris was curled up in one of the bathroom stalls, trying to control his sobs. We all froze, listening to the creatures as they moved closer, their footsteps slow and deliberate. And then it happened. A short sniff. A loud, wet sniff. It came from the stall where Chris was hiding. I turned, my heart pounding in my throat. One of the creatures had heard him. It was coming for us. Part 2. The descent. The building felt alive. Its walls seemed to breathe, the dark corners stretching and shifting as if watching us. I wasn't sure anymore if I was being paranoid or if it was something else. It didn't help that the very air felt different, too thick, like the place was drawing something out of us, slowly stealing our sense of time and place. We hadn't heard from Andrew or Will for what felt like hours, though it could have been mere minutes. The silence of the abandoned halls pressed in on me, thick and suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards underfoot seemed amplified. like it wasn't just the building that creaked, but the very fabric of reality itself, groaning under the weight of something unseen. I could feel it, the feeling that something was watching, lurking just outside the corner of my vision, hiding in the shadows that seemed to stretch too far, too deep. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was as if the building knew we were here, knew we were trespassing in its forgotten corridors. And it didn't want us here. Chris was tense beside me, his flashlight flickering nervously, but I couldn't blame him. We were both shaken by the constant sense of wrongness that clung to everything. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled every time we turned a corner, as though the darkness itself was stretching, trying to swallow us whole. Do you ever feel like something's following us? Chris whispered, his voice tight. I looked at him, the blood draining from my face. I don't know, man, but I feel like it's more than just us being here. He didn't respond, his eyes darting around the room nervously. The silence was oppressive, the kind that makes every footstep sound like a drumbeat in a hollow chamber. Then we heard it, a soft creak like the sound of a door slowly pushing open. At first, I thought it was just our imagination, but it was too clear, too distinct. The creak came again, this time followed by a soft thud, as though something heavy had shifted in the distance. What the hell was that? Chris murmured, his grip tightening around his flashlight. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I didn't want to go investigate, but I knew we had no choice. We had to keep moving. Slowly, we made our way towards the source of the noise, the shadows growing thicker, the air colder. I felt it then, something not right. The feeling that we weren't alone in the hallway, that whatever was in this place wasn't going to leave us in peace. We reached the door where the noise had come from. It was slightly ajar. The faintest draft of cold air slipped through, carrying with it the faint, metallic scent that had lingered in the air since we arrived. Without a word, I pushed the door open. The room inside was dark, save for the flickering light of my flashlight. The walls were covered in peeling paint, the remnants of something that had once been alive but now felt dead. I stepped into the room, my heart hammering in my chest. The air was thick with dust, the smell of decay suffocating. As I swept the flashlight across the room, my eyes locked on something strange. There at the far corner was an old wooden chair, but it wasn't empty. No, there was something sitting in it. The figure was slumped, its back hunched and twisted in a way that didn't seem human. Its head lolled to the side, but it wasn't looking at us. Instead, it seemed to be listening, waiting. Chris's breath caught behind me, and I felt him stiffen. "W, what is that?" He whispered, his voice barely a tremor. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was frozen in place, my eyes locked onto the figure. The air seemed to grow even thicker, the weight of the room pressing down on me. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, a cacophony of run, get out, don't look back. I turned to leave, but just as I did, I heard it, a soft, scraping sound from the corner, like nails dragging across the floor. The figure moved. My pulse spiked. I could hear it now, the unmistakable sound of breath, low, ragged, coming from somewhere too close. I didn't dare look back as we rushed toward the door, but as we ran, the feeling of being watched grew unbearable. The hallway was endless, stretching out further than it should have. My mind raced. We weren't here before. We hadn't passed this door. It wasn't passable. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure standing at the far end of the hall, obscured by the thick shadows. It didn't move, just stood there, watching. It was as if it was waiting for us to see it. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat as we sprinted past, the sense of something chasing us growing sharper. It wasn't just our footsteps echoing anymore. There was something else. A scraping sound, like claws dragging against the floor, echoing through the dark. I could hear Chris behind me, his breath heavy, desperate. "What the fuck is going on here?" he gasped. "I don't know," I yelled, my voice hoarse. "But we need to get out. Now." We reached a staircase, the same staircase we'd taken before, but it wasn't the same. It didn't look right. The steps were uneven, crooked, like they led to somewhere else entirely. I looked up. There was a light at the top of the stairs, dim and flickering. It beckoned, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was up there was waiting for us. Not just waiting, but expecting us. With one last glance at Chris, I took the first step upward. The staircase creaked beneath my weight, and I heard a sound, a whisper. Low, indistinct, almost like the building itself was speaking to me. "You shouldn't be here." The air grew colder as I ascended, the walls seeming to close in, pressing on me from all sides. And then I felt it. A touch, cold fingers brushing against the back of my neck. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Nothing except the feeling of something behind me. Part 3, the hunt. As the creature lumbered closer, I could finally make out more details of its grotesque form. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched taut over a skeletal frame. Its teeth, sharp, jagged, glinted in the dim light like knives. The head was oddly shaped, somewhere between that of a dog and a moose, though with a smaller, more twisted skull. The air around it felt heavier, charged with an unnatural chill. I couldn't look away. It was like I was trapped in a nightmare, unable to move or scream. It was moving slowly, deliberately, as if it knew exactly where we were. Then, without warning, a loud bang echoed through the hallway. We all jumped, hearts hammering in our chests. Panic began to rise in my throat, but Will kept his hand firmly over my mouth, preventing the scream that was desperate to escape. "Stay quiet," he hissed, his voice trembling, but the creature didn't seem to notice. It kept advancing, its eyes fixed on the bathroom door. Slowly, it turned its head toward the sound, its neck stretching unnaturally before it dropped to all fours. The movement was fluid, too quick, too inhuman. I could hear its claws scratching against the floor as it sprinted away from us. I waited, barely breathing, until the sound of its footsteps faded into the distance. When it was finally gone, I pushed Will's hand off my mouth. Jesus Christ, did you see that? I gasped, my voice hoarse with fear. "Yeah, I fucking saw it," Will spat. "Chris is a goddamn idiot. We could have been killed." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "We need to get the hell out of here, now. No more messing around. This place is cursed." "Fuck yes, we do," Will agreed, his face pale. "Never coming back here. That was stupid as hell." "Stupid doesn't even begin to cover it," I muttered. "We should call the cops or someone who knows how to handle this." Will shook his head quickly. "No, no cops. Let's just get out of here. First, we find Andrew and then we're gone. No more wasting time." I nodded, and we both carefully crept out of the bathroom, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The hallway was dark and silent, the oppressive atmosphere making every step feel like an eternity. I signaled to Will to follow me as we moved toward the middle of the hallway, where Andrew was supposed to be. The girls' bathroom was our target. I wasn't thrilled about checking another bathroom, especially not one with that many fucking creatures down the hall, but it was our best shot. As we neared the bathroom, I saw movement. One of the smaller creatures, less grotesque but equally terrifying, noticed us and immediately charged toward us. We bolted, bursting into the girls' bathroom. Will and I scrambled into one of the stalls, but Chris didn't make it in time. The door slammed behind us, and I could hear the desperate scrabble of his footsteps before they abruptly stopped. I wanted to call out to him, but my voice was caught in my throat. I could hear something that sounded sickeningly like tearing flesh. "Oh my God," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Is he dead?" Will's eyes were wide with panic. He shook his head, gripping my arm. "Don't say that. We don't know anything yet. What proof do we need?" I snapped, my voice rising in anger and fear. We heard him scream. We heard the fucking creature eating him. "Eating him, Will?" I was too loud. I could hear the creatures gnawing stop. Everything went still. Then it came. The low, guttural growl, followed by the unmistakable shuffle of its claws against the tile floor. My heart skipped a beat. I slammed my fist against the stall door, desperation fueling my rage. I didn't care anymore. I needed to make it stop. I flung the door open and lunged at the creature with everything I had. My fists hammered into its grotesque face, hitting it with all my might until it collapsed, twitching. For a moment, I thought it was dead, but then I looked to the side and saw Chris, what was left of him. He was half-eaten, his body mangled and torn to pieces. The horror of it made bile rise in my throat. I didn't even register the panic that gripped me until I slammed my hand against Will's stall. "We're getting the fuck out of here," I ordered, my voice hoarse. "But we have to find Andrew," Will protested, his face pale with fear. "Andrew? Forget Andrew. He's probably already dead, just like Chris. We're not playing hero anymore. We're running," I snapped. We bolted from the bathroom, sprinting down the hallway, our flashlights shaking in our hands. The creatures were closing in, but we could see the exit, the gate. We weren't out of the woods yet, not by a long shot. As we ran, I could hear the screeching and howling from the halls, creatures emerging from every dark corner, following our scent. Some came from the kindergarten, others from the cafeteria, but we kept running. Then we saw it, the gate, the one thing standing between us and whatever was left of our lives. We scrambled over it, our hearts racing as we sprinted toward the only place that felt like safety, the nearby town. But when we reached the car, we were greeted with another nightmare. The vehicle was wrecked, torn apart like it had been savaged by wild animals. There was no way we were getting out of there in that car. Fuck, Will shouted. What the hell do we do now? We keep running, I said. We don't split up this time. We head for the town. We just keep moving. We ran, faster than I ever thought possible, the road stretching out before us, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being hunted. I stole one last look behind me. The creature with the moose-like head, the one that had spared us in the bathroom, was standing just outside the gate, watching us with glowing red eyes. It had no tail, and parts of its skin were missing, revealing the raw flesh beneath. The sight made my blood run cold. We made it to the village, our bodies shaking with exhaustion and terror. The townspeople stared at us like we were insane. It was probably the way we looked, torn, wild-eyed, drenched in sweat and blood. I called my uncle, quickly explaining what had happened. He listened in silence, and when I finished, he told me the only thing that made any sense. You need to find someone with experience, someone who knows about these things, these creatures. You need someone who's old American, native, someone who can deal with what's coming for you. We managed to track down an elderly man who lived on the outskirts of the village. He lived with his wife and teenage son in a small, worn-down house. We entered, and I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, his eyes growing darker with every word. You've been marked, he said, his voice low. You are their new targets, Wendigos or skinwalkers. I suspect that's what you've seen. But there's a way to remove their curse, a ritual. It's the only way you'll be free. The old man performed the ritual in silence, murmuring prayers and blessing us in a language I didn't understand. When he was done, I didn't feel any different, but the heaviness in my chest had lifted. I wasn't sure if it was the ritual or if it was just hope. But one thing was clear, this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Part 4, The Reckoning. As the creature closed the distance between us, the chill in the air thickened. My breath caught in my throat. There was something hypnotic about its movements, slow, deliberate, like it knew the terror it was spreading. Its skin was unnaturally pale, stretched tightly over a frame too thin to be human. But what struck me most was its face. A twisted semblance of an animal's, a malformed mix of moose and dog, but far more sinister. Its eyes, black as night, empty but burning with hunger. I couldn't breathe. It was as if the space around us was shrinking, compressing, suffocating. The world outside that hallway no longer felt real. There was only the creature. Then, as if to shatter the tension, a loud bang echoed from somewhere far down the hall, too loud, too sharp. We flinched, and my pulse nearly stopped. Will's hand remained firmly pressed against my mouth, stifling any sound that could betray our location. I was grateful for that. The last thing we needed was to give ourselves away to whatever the hell this thing was. The creature didn't flinch. It didn't react to the sound at all. It kept coming toward us, its head tilting slightly, as if studying us. But then, as if sensing something else, it suddenly whipped its head around. The sound of its bones cracking as it snapped its neck sent a wave of nausea rolling up my throat. It dropped to all fours. It moved like an animal, but faster, too fast. The sound of its claws scraping across the floor filled the air, and it was gone, disappearing down the hallway with unsettling speed. I barely had time to think before I was gripping Will's arm, trying to steady my shaking limbs. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. Jesus Christ, did you see that? I managed to whisper, my voice hoarse. Will's eyes were wide, pupils blown with fear. He nodded, breathless. Yeah, that wasn't a fucking animal. That was something wrong. We stood there in the suffocating silence for a few more moments. My mind spun, my thoughts scattered, but I couldn't shake one thing from my head. We weren't safe. This place, whatever it was alive, and it was hunting us. We need to leave, I whispered, my throat dry, my stomach twisted in knots. We have to get out of here. Yeah, Will breathed, his voice unsteady. But first, We need to find Andrew. We can't leave him here. Not like this. But the more I thought about Andrew, the more I doubted we'd find him. If anything, I felt a growing sense of dread telling me he was already gone. Whatever was happening here wasn't just random. We were being hunted. And Andrew, he'd been one of the first to disappear. We stepped carefully out of the bathroom, eyes darting to every shadow. The hallway was a labyrinth of terror, its dim lights flickering as if they too were afraid of what lurked within. No sign of Andrew, but there was no time to waste. I motioned for Will to follow me as I turned the corner, leading us back toward the girls' bathroom. It was the last place Andrew had been seen. We moved like ghosts, barely breathing, flashlights shaking in our hands. But as we neared the bathroom, something moved ahead of us. A creature, smaller than the one we'd seen before, darted into view, its glowing eyes catching the dim light. It larked onto us, its snarl audible even from this distance. Without thinking, we bolted for the bathroom, but I knew immediately that we were too late. Chris didn't make it. I could hear the creature's frantic movements inside, the sickening sound of flesh tearing, the crunch of bone. I squeezed into a stall while following, but the door didn't slam behind Chris. I heard him scream. The worst part was that the scream wasn't like any human scream I had ever heard. It was wrong. It was too sharp, too animalistic. Is he? I whispered, my voice cracking. Will shook his head, his face pale as death. I don't know. I could hear the sound of gnawing. I didn't want to know what it was. But then, without warning, everything went quiet. A heavy thump vibrated the bathroom floor. I could barely think. The smell in the air was metallic, a stench of blood that made my stomach churn. And then I saw it. The creature was back. It had Chris. Its long claws gripped his body, tearing into him, ripping him apart as if he were nothing more than prey. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I only acted. I slammed my fist against the stall door, desperation and rage flooding my system. I threw the door open and lunged at the creature, slamming into it with every ounce of strength I had left. It snarled, its eyes flashing with malice, but I didn't stop. I didn't care anymore. I kept pounding, my fists landing with sickening thuds against its misshapen skull. For a moment it staggered back, and then with a final sickening crack, its head caved in. But it was too late. Chris, he was gone. Will, I screamed, banging on his stall. We need to go now, but Andrew. Will's voice was strained, panicked. Forget Andrew, he's already dead. We need to get out of here now, I shouted, the terror in my voice raw and urgent. Will hesitated for a fraction of a second, but then he nodded, eyes wide with fear. All right, let's go. We ran. We didn't stop to look back. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, the walls closing in around us. Every creak, every whisper of sound felt like the creatures were on our heels, hunting us, waiting for us to falter. I didn't care. I just had to get out. And then we saw it, the gate, the only thing standing between us and whatever was left of our lives. We ran like animals, the sound of our footsteps loud and frantic in the otherwise silent night. We made it to the fence, scrambled over it like rats fleeing a sinking ship. But when we reached the car, our hearts sank. The vehicle was destroyed, smashed, windows shattered, tires slashed. Whatever had been hunting us had found our last escape route. We had no choice but to keep running, and this time we refused to split up. We headed toward the village, toward the only semblance of safety we could find. The road stretched endlessly ahead, but every footstep felt heavier than the last. As we reached the village, the people stared at us as if we were ghosts, their expressions filled with confusion and fear. We must have looked like we'd just crawled out of hell. I called my uncle, a man with knowledge of things beyond the ordinary, and quickly explained what had happened. He listened, silent for a long moment. "Get to the old man," he said finally, his voice grave. "The one with the knowledge of these things. He can help you." We found the man, an old Native American, living on the outskirts of the village with his wife and teenage son. We entered his small, humble home, and as soon as we told him what had happened, his face hardened with understanding. He was no stranger to the darkness we had unleashed. "They're marking you," he said quietly. "Wendigos, or maybe skinwalkers. You've been cursed, but there is a way to break it. A ritual. It's the only way." We didn't hesitate. The ritual was simple but intense. He chanted in a language I didn't recognize, his hands moving in careful, precise gestures. A thick, heavy silence enveloped the room as he completed the ritual, a sense of dread lifting slightly from our shoulders. But I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. As we left his house, the weight of what we had endured pressed down on me. I wasn't sure if the curse had been lifted or if it was simply waiting, biding its time. But I felt it still, lurking, watching. And somewhere in the darkness, I knew they were still hunting us. Part 5. The hunt we ran, but it felt like we were trapped in a nightmare. Every step I took seemed to echo louder than the last. The halls stretched in ways that defied logic, like they were alive, watching us, bending to their own will. I couldn't remember how long we'd been running or how far we'd gone. Time had become fluid, stretching in ways it shouldn't. The sounds of our footsteps, breathing, heartbeat, the creak of floorboards, took on a rhythm that felt too unnatural. Like it had always been there, like the building had always been waiting for us. It felt as if the air had thickened, as though something was pressing down from above, suffocating every breath. The smell was worse now. That same sickly, metallic stench that had been following us since we first stepped into this cursed place. But now it was stronger. It clung to my clothes, my skin, and no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't shake it. I could hear Will's breathe, ragged, sharp, each intake of air as panicked as mine. His footfalls were heavy, and for a moment I could have sworn he had stopped moving. A feeling of dread bloomed in my chest. No, don't stop. I risked a glance back. The hallway was empty, but something felt terribly wrong. The shadows in the corners were too thick, like they were clinging to the walls, watching, waiting. We finally reached the gate, but when I pushed it open, I froze. The car, it had been destroyed, not just damaged, smashed. Watching, from behind, from the shadows, the silence stretched, unbroken, like the entire world had gone still. Then the rustle of something, moving just outside our line of sight. I could barely breathe. "Will," I whispered. "We're being followed." He didn't answer, but I could hear the terror in his footsteps as he quickened his pace, running beside me now. Every step we took felt like it echoed back at us, like we were trapped in an endless loop. And then, in a fleeting moment of clarity, I realized. The town. We were almost there. But the road that led us there seemed different now, somehow longer, more oppressive. The trees lining the path seemed to lean toward us, their branches reaching out like fingers scraping the air. The houses in the distance that had once seemed so far away were suddenly looming too close, too suffocating. I stopped. Will kept running ahead of me, unaware. The feeling of being watched, that slow crawl of dread, intensified. And then, familiarity. I looked around. This place, it felt too familiar. The buildings, the stretch of road, I had seen this before. But no, I had never been here before. I looked down at my hands, scraped, bloodied from the run. But they weren't my hands. They looked wrong. My fingers looked thinner, longer. My nails yellowed. I blinked. The image of my hands shifted like a mirage. No, something was wrong with me. I was losing grip on reality. It was as if the very essence of this place was warping me, turning my senses against me. "Will," I shouted, my voice trembling. "Will, stop." But he didn't stop. He was running faster now, eyes wide, but his movements were unnatural, jerky, too rigid. His breathing came in ragged bursts. He was running from something, and it was me. The realization hit me like a weight on my chest. He could see it too, he knew. The words were inside my head. But no, they were coming from somewhere else. I looked around frantically. "Will," I cried out again, but Will was gone, completely gone, vanished into the shadows. I was alone. Alone with the thing that had been hunting us. The thing that had always been hunting us. I stumbled backward, disoriented, my heart pounding in my chest. But then I saw it. I saw them. The shadows shifted, figures impassably tall, standing at the edge of the trees. Their shapes were twisted, barely human. Their eyes gleamed in the dark, glowing red like fire in the blackness. And then I understood. They weren't just chasing us. They had been waiting. This whole time, they had always been waiting. For us. I turned to run, but the path, if you could even call it a path, was gone. The trees had closed in. The road had disappeared. The world was no longer real. A low growl vibrated through the air, deep, guttural. I didn't dare look back. I knew what would be behind me. The creature, the thing that had followed us from the beginning. But it wasn't just one anymore. There were others, more of them, coming from every direction. I ran, but my feet felt heavy. The ground beneath me felt wrong. Everything was wrong. The world was slipping, folding in on itself, and I was caught in it, struggling to breathe, struggling to escape. But then I heard it, the familiar voice, soft, cold, and detached. You can't run forever, and I knew it. I knew it in my bones. I would never escape. I had been marked the moment I stepped into that forsaken building. It didn't matter where I ran, where I hid. They would always find me. They were already here, inside me, watching, waiting. And as the dark consumed me, I realized the truth. We were never meant to escape. It was never just about the creatures. It was about the place, the curse, the knowledge that, in the end, we were just another chapter in a much older, much darker story. A story that had no ending. You made it back for now. But the things in the dark never truly leave, do they? They watch, they wait, and perhaps they remember you now too. If you want to hear more, if you dare to listen again, step back into the shadows. Like the video. Subscribe, but know this, some doors once opened do not close so easily.